start recording now, can cut it later.
Yeah.
But yeah, when you need to switch, like obviously that thing, like the
This,
screen there,
yeah.
I think if you click laptop, that should work. You just try.
Oh shoot, it's H.
I think it's yeah.
It's just a thing.
Okay, there you go.
Okay.
And yeah, we can wait for at least, I don't know, like 5 people to come at least.
Yeah.
I don't, yeah.
Yeah, I expect it certainly this week to be slow.
Okay.
Yeah. Oops. Yeah.
How do I know which one?
Why can that come? I don't know.
Is it in Python? Does this not connect to HTML? Okay. Can you join the Zoom meeting?
Oh, yeah.
It's yeah,
Let's
it's in
announce
it's
it.
probably an older announcement, but it's also
Yeah.
like ufsec.zoom.org.
Oh, yeah. Should I turn on the webcam or not?
Actually, I think how it's now is fine. With like how I've done it before.
All right. Finish with start.
Yeah.
Well, welcome to Application Development Workshop. Make sure to scan the QR code to sign in. Okay, so what is an application deployment? So it's the process of moving your code from your local environment, local host, your laptop, to a live server where people can actually see it. So the deployment cycle is typically like you build your code and then you test it, make sure it's secure, and then you release it to the web. And then you can monitor progress, etc. And this is very important because in a production level, it's not local host. It's really, you're using these application deployment websites to actually host it and so that other people can see it. So how does the web actually see your code? Well, it uses port binding. So port binding is basically, it assigns a port and then it communicates with the web. So for example, in this code snippet that is Node.js, we assign a port and we're going to go to an environment of port. So this port right here, we're going to go to environment and then we're going to search the port. And then if for some reason it can't find it, we're going to go to localhost 3000, which is usually what React runs on. And that's how you find it. So what platform to use? There's a lot of platforms out there that are pretty popular. Render, Heroku. Heroku is a pretty old one. Those are based on easy to use, click, and then you deploy. It's pretty fast, good demos, not extremely scalable, unlike the other ones, but like AWS, GCP, and Azure. And you got Vercel. Vercel is a great app to use for front end because they've also made Next.js, which is a framework built on top of React, and they're really specialized in that. So it's a great application for front end development application on the web. And then you got AWS, GCP, Azure. These are the big ones. These are usually the enterprise large scale systems that are definitely more complex and very limited usually in the free usage. And but they do maintain a more secure and reliable infrastructure. So when we deploy a website, there's several strategies you can use to actually make it better and more secure. The first one is the Big Bang deployment. This is the first one that came out. This basically has users go to a load balancer here, we can see, and this is where the HTTP will direct the traffic to a version, an infrastructure. For example, in here, we go before deployment, we go to version 1. So we send all the users to version 1 of the server. And then once you update it, you go to version 2. You send all the users to version 2. Now, the benefit of this, it's easy to use. And also, you don't mix your old code on the version 1 with your new code of version 2. Except if there's a problem with the new version, you would have to send all the users back to the old version, and this can cause conflict, which is very risky in a high, scalable system. So definitely use this more for like a project-based or like easy demos. Definitely, probably not a large-scale enterprise. Next, we got rolling. This is probably the second most popular one. So what rolling does, it basically gradually moves users to a new server. So once, for example, we see the green box, and once this is done, we can gradually move them to the version 1.2.2. So we don't move all users at once, we move them gradually. This is much better because like that, if there's a problem with the new version, you don't have everyone stuck in the blocked one. So you'd gradually bring them back out. So it's definitely more complex because you have to handle all these systems, but it's definitely more secure and reliable. And also definitely more resource and cost more to maintain these type of systems. Now, last but not least, this is probably the most used version is the blue-green method. The blue-green deployment method is basically maintaining 2 server infrastructures. This is very costly because you have to maintain 2 of them. However, the benefit of this is that you can start updating one server while not even affecting the other server at all. So this will definitely be useful in the long-term run. If, for example, the blue server is broken, you could just send them to the green server, etc. So again, more infrastructure, higher cost, definitely more reliable, large-scale enterprises definitely use this. AWS, all of them use it. And this is definitely a good version. Now there's also Canary, and is basically using this, but instead of sending, for example, if blue had a problem and we send all the users to green, we would send the users gradually to green. So that's what Canary is deployment. So next, we're going to go to a demo. So today we're going to do a render demo, which is a popular site for full stack development. So it's very easy to use. And honestly, I personally enjoy it for a personal website. So if you go to the Discord, in the meeting resources, I have a GitHub repo that's called Render Workshop. So if you click that, it'll look like this. So today we're going to make a quiz app with Python, with Flask, and React. So you can see all the instructions of how to download all the dependencies and also deploying it on Render. So what you would first do is you'd fork the project, and then that would make it to your repository, and then you would clone it. So once you're in your IDE, you'd clone the project, and then you would get this. So we can see this is our backend. It's quite simple. We basically just import some libraries, and then we assign Flask app to start it up, and then we have like a simple questions that the front end will get from the API questions route. And then we also have a neutral route, which will just basically say that the backend was working. And then here is where we assign the port to get the port. If it fails, it'll get the 5000 localhost port. And then we have the front end. So you go to front end and make sure you do npm install. So you'd go like cd front end, and then from here you do npm install, and then you would install the React dependencies and libraries needed. And once you're in here, you can see the code that we have for today. It's quite simple again. We have basically a bit of CSS, and then we have some use state variables. And then this is how we get our route from the backend. And if it fails, we just use the localhost backend routes. So let's test this first out. So we have front end. We have backend, cd backend. Then we do Flask run, start our backend. Then we're going to do npm start. Okay, so we can see our little quiz app right here. So what is 14 plus 2 times 2? 18. What is capital Nigeria? Abuja. Which language is this app using? Python. And we can see we have a simple quiz right here. And now we're going to deploy this on the actual Render website for everyone to use. So to do this, first I'd probably just stop launch. And then once you're in here, we're going to go to render. If you type in render, you should have this screen. And then you would get started for free. And then you would sign up. And once you sign up, well, I'm signed in right now. And then you would go to new. So you click new. And here we have a bunch of different versions right here. And static is basically what you would use for your front end. It won't change. And then you would use web server because that's what it's going to change eventually. So web server is what we're going to use for the backend. So if you click backend, web server, you're going to click the repository that we have, the render workshop. And once you're in here, we can see we can make our name. So I want to name this the backend. And then these are optional. The language we're using is Python free, the main branch. Then select your region. So I selected Virginia, US East, because that's where it's closest to us. And then root directory, this is our backend. So if you go to here on your VS Code, make sure you have backend as your root directory. And then your build command, you're going to type in pip install -r requirements to install the requirements. So if you see in our project, we have the requirements. We have the requirements for Flask 2.3.2 in the Flask course. So this will tell Render to actually build it. Because basically what Render is doing right now, it's in a container and we're giving it all the materials and resources that it needs to build the project. So that's what we're doing right now. And then our start command should just be Python app.py. And then these are the different versions. So you can see there's a lot of versions to choose from. The free one's probably the most recommended one. But basically, what your CPU is basically using is basically those API requests. Every time you request from the backend or the front end, these are the reason the CPU is charging. So the more CPU you have, the more requests you can give. Now the RAM is how much you can store. Think about the user, you want to store this database, you want to store, his email, his password. If you have a ton of users, you're gonna have to store a lot of things. So that's why you would have to probably pay them quite a bit. And but for this workshop, It's pretty simple, so we can use the free version. Now, environment variables, we don't have any for now. Now, if you were to actually like build a database, well, first I'll do that afterwards, but let's deploy it. So now after we have everything, let's make sure backend should be good. Now let's deploy web service. And you can see now we can see it's waiting building logs, and it'll show prompts about what it's currently doing. So like I said, it's a container that's we're assigning all these resources and it's going to build our backend. So it's installing this step. If you have a lot of dependencies and libraries to install, it will typically take a long time, but for this project, it shouldn't be that bad. Does anyone have any questions so far? So we can see they built this successfully. So usually after this step, it'll typically give you a link to your backend. And oh, it does right here. If you see, we have a link right here. And if we click it, oh, well, it's still building. We can see quiz backend is running. And that's exactly what we set as our base route in our app. If you go to app.py, you can see our base route. We see quiz backend is running. So we can see that our successfully backend render is currently doing it successfully. You can see. So now, what if I wanted to build like a database? I want to add a database to this. Like, we don't have a database for this particular project, but for example, I would use Postgres. And here I just name it, and then I would just deploy it, create database. And then once you have your database, it's going to give you an internal database URL. And once you have that database URL, you can go back, you would go to your backend, and then here you go see and you see environment. And you add environment variable and you put database backend whatever URL. And then you put, so for example, add, you put the key as the database backend URL as the key, and then the value, which is the internal database URL that it's going to give you. So that's if you wanted to add like a Postgres SQL to your backend or any type of database. Next, we want to do our front end. So the front end doesn't change. It's just going to be a static stainless site that we're going to use. And we're going to pick, again, our repository. And here I'm going to name it front end. Again, main. And then the directory, we're going to put front end. And here, I'm pretty sure it's npm build and where's and npm start. If you go to the repository, you can see on the README of the exact instructions. So npm install and npm run build. I got it should be run build. Then you just paste that in here. And then the directory should just be build. I'm pretty sure. Yep. And then here we do have a variable because our backend we're calling the API question API. So we're going to have to put it in here. So how do you do this? So the name of the variable, if you go back to our VS Code, and then you would go to front end and app.js. And we can see we call React API app API URL. So we're going to copy this, and then we're going to go to Google, and name a variable is going to be that. And now the value. So what the value is going to be exactly this, the backend link. The backend link is going to be your value. But if you notice, it's not going to work because we're calling the routes API questions. So you're going to have to add API questions to the end of the URL. So if I do this, why it keeps doing that? So if I add it right here, then it's going to successfully call it. So now just making sure it works. Render front end. Okay. And this should be good. Okay, now we can deploy the static website. Now, something that's important to note is that the front end site is what you're going to share with others. So any like secrets or like anything you want to hide from the public, you don't put it in your front end. Something also important to note is that if you use external APIs, for example, I use a Gemini API key, you don't want to put that in your database. Like, well, if you use it, you have to restrict it because people could just be spamming it, and then it's going to cost you a lot of money because their quota is restricted. So if you don't want someone exploiting you, like I would limit, and that's why security is very important in these deployment websites, because if it's not secure, people can easily find ways to either like mess around with you or like take advantage of you. So it's very important to be secure, test your code, passwords. I recommend like hashing them, log in and sign up using like a JWT, JSON Web Token. You need to really restrict the access to the public. So, okay. So it's still loading. What is it? Yeah, it's still loading. And this is, so going back to the deployment strategies, this would be considered a rolling strategy. The reason being is that someone could be on your app currently, and once you push to GitHub, it would eventually change it, but you can still be using the old version. It's just you'd have to reload your website to have the new version. So we're gradually moving the users to the new version. And that's what a rolling deployment strategy is. Now in like Render, they don't really have blue-green strategy. That's mainly what like these large enterprise, AWS, GCP, Cloudflare, all these type of companies have it, but Render typically doesn't have it. And the Big Bang Theory is the Big Bang is typically not used. So we see our site is live. So if we just click the link, we can see we have a quiz app. So we can see our backend successfully loaded because it wouldn't show the questions if our backend wasn't working, and our front end is clearly working. So now we can just have an answer, or click the answer, let's say it's wrong. So we have successfully deployed our website. Now, like I said, when you share it, you share the front end URL. You don't share the backend. So you can share this with anyone and you have to use it. And if you want to see metrics, you wanted to monitor activity, well, we just created our website. So there's not really activity right now, but we can see metrics right here. And if you want to add a variable here, you can do it. And so let's say we wanted to add something. Let's see how it does that. So let's add a new question. to our backend. Let's put a new ID. Let's say, what color is the sun? Yellow, green, and answer yellow. So here we're gonna add this. And then here we're just gonna change the color of the text. Let's change this one to black. And then once we save this, now I'm gonna push this to the main GitHub. So git add, commit, added, pushed in, and a color text. Then so now once we push it, Render is going to automatically redeploy your website. Like I said, you could still use the old one, but Render currently is redeploying your website. So we can see it's currently redeploying it. And the thing about Render is that it will always, if it detects, for example, your website crashes, it's always going to redeploy. Now, you might think it's going to go in a continuous cycle, but Render will actually, at some point, will go to the previous version that was working. So if it kept crashing the new update, it would go back to the old version, and because it was working previously. So we can see our site is live, the new version. And then if we go to the new version, click 18, Cairo. No. Well, let me see. No, it's still deploying the backend. Okay. So the route goes, the front end calls to the back end. And then the back end, if we had a database, we'd call the database. And then the database, it would retrieve from the database and going back to the front end. So that's typically how the route goes. Yep. I'm honestly not sure. I haven't really tested capacity, but I'm sure you could find like online about it. But yeah, I'm not exactly sure. However, I will say that basically, if no one uses your app for about 15 minutes, it'll stop working. And at that point, you would have to relaunch your website. It's going to redeploy and it's going to it's called a cold start. So it's going to restart your website. So if no activity in 15 minutes, it's going to restart. Yeah. But if it's only React, I would recommend Vercel because that's definitely a more front-end based. But full stack projects, like Render is really good, I'd say, for free versions. So now let's see. Everything's deployed. So let's add, and we can see our question is here now. And we can see the color of the text is black. So it's correctly updated the front end and our back end with a new question. Sun is yellow. So that's a bit about the workshop. Let's see if there's anything. You can also create projects and you can add your front end and back end in here. The free version, I believe only has one. Yeah, the free version only has one. And then if you want to get rid of your website, you could just suspend it right here. Click suspend. And then obviously you can add billing if you want. And then so does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
Like, you have a database, I assume it works like the same as, you know, API.
Correct, yeah. So like I showed before is like you click new and then you can like add database like PostgreSQL. So you would just do this, you would name it, and then honestly, you don't even have to touch any of these. You could just create the database, and then it's going to deploy, and it's going to show like a bunch of links, and they're going to be hidden. And then you would click the internal database URL, and then you copy that, and you would go to backend, and you would go to environment. You add an environment variable. You would put this as a DB whatever database URL, and you put the link that it gave you, the internal database URL, as the value. And that's how you add it.
Is it like equivalent as if you have like a dot .NET?
Yeah, it's exactly that. It's exactly that for the web. So yeah. Hmm. Um, you can also go to Vercel real quick. So Vercel is more of a front-end website development. Uh, so here you basically just sign in, and then you would basically add a project. So add a new project, and then here you'd go or run their workshop, and then you would import it. And then here you can type in the language, etc., whichever one you want to use. And then you would name it, and then the directory. So exactly what we did on render, you would just edit directory and you would choose backend, front end. Here they actually already give it to you. And then you can add your build command, directory, and install command. And then any variables you have. It's pretty much exactly like render, but it's definitely a good one for front-end development. And then there's also private launches that you could do. However, this would be, you would have to have a paid version. So the private versions, if you want a private website, that would have to be a paid version. So yeah, if no one has any questions. Oh yeah.
Or if you said it, if you change your GitHub, how, you know, like how long it takes to do.
I do not know. I'm guessing is how big your project is. Yeah.
Sometimes it's annoying.
Yeah. It definitely complex projects are definitely going to be harder to launch. That's for sure. And also, certainly with the free version, it's definitely limited. So you probably wouldn't get much use out of it. Like, yeah. Um, so no other questions? Okay. Well, I think that's a lot for this workshop. Thanks for coming. And yeah, make sure if you haven't signed up to sign up. Oh, sign in, I mean. And yeah.
What's that?
Yeah.
How was that practice? You did. What's your name?
Zane?
Zane?
Yeah.
Oh, like the Ninjago character.